The demigods are the main symbol of power throughout the lands between, each and all a champion of unparalleled strength, skill, and intellect. These are the beings that have defined the very history of the land they live in. The demigods were each an individual bastion of power, and yet, by themselves, they could not win entire conflicts. They couldn't face entire armies alone, and they couldn't be everywhere at once. The mighty children of America sought many ways to enforce the states they built for themselves, so the creation of an army loyal to these individuals were a given. The military strength displayed by the servants of the demigods are impressive to say the least, even in the stagnant state they find themselves in after the shattering. Yet, even within these mighty armies, we can still find groups of individuals that were a cut above the rest, not only in their skill at arms, but also through their unwavering loyalty to their liege lord or lady. Each and every demigod had their own elite fighting force, with each one of them reaching legendary status for their finesse, tactical acumen, and Herculean perseverance. They were not only soldiers, but counselors, informants, spies, bodyguards, and even generals for the many military campaigns perpetrated by their lords. And today we put the very best soldiers of the lands between to the test, against each other no less, to determine which demigod possessed the best elite fighting force, and consequentially, the best army for their efforts. With that said, there were many fighting forces in Elden Ring that could be considered elite, so I will emphasize on those whose loyalty lied with a demigod or a lord of similar status. I will also try to focus on elite units that were known for fighting on prominent battles throughout the game's lore, or at the very least, are still relevant forces in the current events of the game. So without any further ado, let us analyze the very best soldiers in the lands between. Starting off with a DLC exclusive, we open up our contest with the Fire Knights of Mesmer. This order of pyromaniacs is found within the Lands of Shadow, more specifically within the colossal fortress of the Shadow Keep, where they guarded against any and all intruders. But these elite warriors are not just your average glorified sentry, for these individuals actually hail from some of the most prestigious echelons of the Erdtree society. Having been born receiving some of the best education and training that nobility can buy, this order of warriors eventually rose to become some of Mesmer's most trusted commanders, answering to him and him alone. In fact, their armor even states that these were the only ones who truly knew Mesmer. These warriors became feared throughout the Lands of Shadow not only for their great finesse with a blade, but also because of their ability to utilize potent fire incantations, similar in nature to that of Mesmer's own incantations. Their fighting style is also very unusual, utilizing of serpentine maneuverability alongside their affinity towards fire in order to pressure their opponents into submission, a blend of aggressive swordplay and pyro techniques. Their weaponry also differentiates itself by their undulations, which resemble both the visage of fire and the body of a serpent. They likely forged them this way in order to complement their fighting style harmoniously with both their physical and magical arsenal. A curious detail about them is also the fact that they are not particularly seen in the story trailer for Shadow of the Erdtree, leaving it ambiguous if they ever participated in the siege of Belurat or any of the initial hostilities of Mesmer's crusade. Also, even though they are never found outside of the Shadow Keep, it can still be speculated that they, at the very least, took part in the cleansing of the Hornsent around the Shadow Tree's vicinity. The matter of when their order was created is also left ambiguous, since some of the items describes them as each and every knight hail from a renowned family of the Erdtree's upper echelon, but were shunned and chased from their homes after pledging allegiance to Mesmer as their master. The Order of the Erdtree was established during Marika's regime, by Marika herself no less, giving the impression that these knights, as an order, were not an organized group until the fall of Belurat, or at the very least the consolidation of the Golden Order. Nevertheless, this knightly order created some of the most lethal opponents we can find during our journey through the Shadowlands. There are, or at least were, 5 prominent members of the Fire Knights who made their names known within the Shadow Keep's history. These 5 knights of great renown are Quelig, Hild, Sauza, Wego, and Kud. Quelig is the very first knight we encounter throughout our journey. He is a fanatic of the Golden Order and relentlessly hunt down any he himself deems unworthy of America's grace. Hild is a spirit summoned who, after his demise through unknown means, had his ashes remains enshrined within the Shadow Keep. There is few that is known about Hild as a knight or as a character, but it is stated that he was a dear friend to fellow Fire Knight Salza, and that he advocated for the preservation of the specimens found within the Shadow Keep storage room. Salza, the Sage, is a mighty and defiant sorcerer of the Fire Knights who was once the disciple of the elder Wego. He currently protects the great bridge that leads to the ancient ruins of Rau, the same ruins he once refused to burn down. Salza and Hild has this particular relationship where they both found themselves lovers of history, let us say. They wish to preserve the past of the land they lived in, or at the very least the land that they now control. Now we move to Wego, the elder and teacher to Salza. He is the eldest of the Fire Knights. For some reason, Wego was gnawed at by loneliness and turned his attention to the spirituality of Mesmer's flame. The flaming walking corpses we find throughout the flooded section of the Shadow Keep are of his own doing. Nothing else is known about Wego as a character, as a knight, but he was the one, like said before, that taught Salza the ways of the Fire Knights and their incantations. Lastly but not least, we have Kud, captain of the Fire Knights and the leader of their order. He stands as a paragon of strength and leadership within the ranks of Mesmer's military forces. He currently stands guard to Mesmer's chambers himself, and is one of his most trusted advisors and also one of his most powerful enforcers. One of the very best Mesmer could deploy in the field of battle. The Fire Knights, although only shown in the OC, are one of the most fleshed out elite units in the lore of Elden Ring, and currently stands as one of the most lethal and efficient fighting forces in the game and its lore.
Cower in fear of the night. The hands of the fell omen shall brook thee no quarter.
Now we return to the lands between to revisit the terror of all tarnished kind, the Knight Calvary. The Knight Calvary are an order of knights likely hailing from the ranks of the Erdtree Sentinels. Today these warriors serve as judge, jury, and executioners in service to the fell omen himself, tirelessly wandering the night in their efforts to relentlessly deliver death to any great warrior, knight, or tarnished who may challenge the rule of Morgoth. Preferring to fight on horseback, these knights utilize weapons and armor fit for such fighting style. They are one of the most relentless enemies we can find throughout the lands between, and were likely handpicked by Morgoth himself, as they reflect his own unwavering and zealous determination to defeat the enemies of the Golden Order. There are no individuals of these orders which are known by name, but each and every one of these knights are some of the best warriors the Golden Order could field, and it shows as they have maintained a reputation of blood and fear wherever they are found. Although a short passage to commemorate the Knight Calvary, I still find it important to put them in here since they were Morgoth's chosen elite, even above the Erdtree Sentinel Knights, which were a paragon of knightlyhood within the Golden Order. But these knights, they were trusted with something more. They were trusted with information, and they were trusted with hunting down those who would be seen dangerous to the Golden Order, deviously dangerous in fact. They were ordered to silently hunt down any and all who threatened the rule of the Golden Order and the rule of Morgoth per se. With that said, the lack of information about their order and their secrecy is likely by design.
The time has come. This is our moment. Let's make it something to remember.
From the darkness of the night, we now travel towards the red and rotted sands of Caelid. We now address the Redmanes, Radahn's loyal elite soldiers. Their reputation was such in the lands between that they were popularly known as having no weaknesses. It's unfortunate how the battles of the Shattering proved otherwise for the Redmanes though. Morgoth incurred to them what is perhaps their first recorded defeat as an organized army during the siege of Lengdel. Also, during the later stages of the Shattering, the Redmanes would once again taste the bitterness of defeat when the Cleanrot Knights of Malenia forever tainted their land. Although the Battle of Caelid did not broke them as a fighting force, the Aeonian rot blights their home to this day. Nevertheless, these warriors persist in the name of their lord, such is their resilience and loyalty for their liege. But independently of how many defeats the Redmanes unfortunately bore during the Shattering, their resolve remains firm. These are perhaps the most ferocious and aggressive soldiers the Land Between has ever seen throughout its history, making them fitting companions for the battlefield's Red Lion. Fitting to being Radahn's personal force, the Redmanes employ the usage of gravitational skills in order to implement their fighting prowess. Cracked blades and gravitational arrows multiply their already bestial strength these soldiers display during combat. They also became accustomed with the use of pyrotechniques, even though that's not their forte, ever since the spread of the Scarlet Rot. The soldiers in Redmane Castle currently keep the rot at bay with the usage of fire. In fact, over time, fire became a symbolic gesture of their defiance. Nothing exemplifies this better than old Jaren's old sword, the Flamberger. This beloved sword of Jaren's eventually became the symbol of the castle itself. The Redmanes were also fond of gladiatorial contests. Not only do they have one of the 3 great colosseums located within the sands of Caelid, but some of their most unique members rose through prominence by showcasing their skills in the arena. They likely kept these gladiatorial contests in an attempt to keep their soldiers battle-ready and sharp, even in times of peace, as well as making for good sport. In regards to their personalities, the Redmanes were a unique bunch. Among these unique soldiers, 3 of them stood out amongst the fierce and fiery champions of Caelid. The first is Olga, the longest serving member of all the Redmanes. A skilled bowman, Olga studied alongside Radahn in order to learn how to manipulate gravitational magic. That magic greatly complemented his already great skills with the bow, turning him into a lethal sniper on the battlefield. The second Redmane of note is Freya, a former gladiator whose skills in the fighting pits impressed even the lion himself. Currently, Freya finds herself following Miquella's footsteps in the lands of Shadow, but before that she was a ferocious gladiator who captivated Radahn so much that she eventually rose into becoming one of his most trusted knights. A battle maniac, Freya seeks the thrill of being part of the greatest of battles against the greatest of champions, and perhaps in her path in the lands of Shadow, she will finally find her match. Lastly but not least, we are presented to the most unique of the Redmanes, Old Jaren. Jaren was a nomadic swordsman unbound to any land, lord, or any title for that matter. He was truly the definition of eccentric. But after spending some time as a guest with the Carrion royals, he was eventually elevated as a guest commander for General Radahn himself. His skills with the blade are unmatched within the Redmanes, and being the most trusted commander in his service to Radahn, he currently stands as the de facto leader of the Redmane castles, after the latter's fall to the rot. Currently, he is the one who organizes the Radahn's festival, and he alone swore an oath with Radahn. An oath of honorable death. It is no wonder that he stands as not only Radahn's second in command, but a trusted friend to the Carrion royal family. In lore, the Redmanes were perhaps the most renowned soldiers of the land. Their ferocious tenacity alongside their bestial endurance made them the standard of quality among soldiers for the lands between. Unfortunately for them, that same ferociousness and endurance would be matched by a far more relentless fighting force. One who fought as if they had nothing to lose. In fact, like their liege lady, they have never known defeat. The Cleanrot Knights. Malenia was the most renowned sword wielder in the history of the lands between, so it is no surprise that she would form a retinue of soldiers to match her undefeated status. The Cleanrot Knights are perhaps the most dangerous army in the history of the lands between. Their skill in combat matches not only the relentless aggression of the Redmanes, but they also have the endurance required to sustain the Scarlet Rot itself. These soldiers knew that by marching alongside Malenia would result in a horrible, rotted fate. Yet, they marched by her side either way. It's difficult to find such loyalty, determination, and sheer will of these levels in a soldier, let alone a whole army. But the unrelenting aspect of their convictions is not the most dangerous characteristic of the Cleanrots, but the fact of how they can weaponize the Scarlet Rot itself. The effects of biological warfare are terrible to behold even to this day, and even among the wars of our real old history. In fact, some historians attribute the spread of the Black Death throughout Europe to the Mongols themselves, who'd hurl dead bodies over fortified walls in an attempt to sicken its defenders to death. The rot is the most aggressive ailment in the lands between, and a fighting force capable of weaponizing it to their will could be nigh unstoppable. The Cleanrots could very likely win any siege if given enough time. A diseased opponent would eventually buckle under the ailments of the rot. And to make the defender's predicament even worse, they are not fighting a patient and passive opponent in the Cleanrots. They would be facing warriors known for their relentless aggression in the face of the enemy. There is likely only 2 organized armies in the lands between today and during the Shattering who possess the resources and the stomach to realistically fight and possibly repel the Cleanrot Knights. Those are the Redmanes and the forces of Leyndell, and we all know what became of the former. In regards to their individual fighting styles, the Cleanrots utilize of their titular spears alongside a short piercing sword. Although they are adorned with armor from head to toe, their lack of shields is indicative of their aggressive fighting style, as they seek to overwhelm their opponents with relentless assault of both piercing, slashing, and even holy incantation attacks, as they are capable of conjuring a phalanx of spears with holy light. Their commanding officers also don a halo scythe capable of conjuring rings of light. Not only are they slowly withering away their opponents with the Scarlet Rot, they are also viciously pressuring their defenses with an unrelenting barrage of piercing and slashing assaults, making them the most dangerous fighting force in the lands between, as it is no wonder they achieved an undefeated status on the battlefield. The Cleanrot Knights are known for their individuality, neither their individual members, but there is one member within their ranks who achieved legendary status not only among their order, but among every knightly order in the lands between. The Cleanrot Knight Finlay was one of the most legendary knights in service of a demigod in the history of the Shattering. She was a hardened survivor of both the Siege of Stormvale and the Battle of Aeonia, but her most legendary feat was the carrying of Malenia to the Halig Tree. After Malenia collapsed in her battle with Radahn, Finlay took it upon herself to carry her liege lady all the way back to the Halig Tree in the far north. Finlay proved herself to be a monstrous fighter after successfully managing such a feat, and became nothing short of a hero to her homeland in the Halig Tree. Malenia is alive today solely because of these women's actions, and now her ashes have been enshrined with honors at the foot of the Halig Tree, guarded by a fellow Cleanrot no less.
I stand with blade aloft, blood afire, for the dignity of my lord and master Mohg.
We now go towards the bloody depths of Mohg's mausoleum. We now discuss the Lord of Blood's own elite force, the Pureblood Knights. And by the way, I'm choosing the Pureblood Knights over the Sanguine Nobles mostly due to the fact that the Purebloods have more characters or character of greater renown than the Sanguine Nobles, and also because their methods and fighting styles are very similar if not identical. It might even be possible, or actually speculative, that every single Sanguine Noble is a Pureblood Knight and vice versa, but that is not stated anywhere, so take that theory with a grain of salt. I must point out though that while similar in fighting styles, with both preferring the use of slick and dexterous weapons to bleed their opponents to death and donning highly ornate cloth instead of armor, the Sanguine Nobles are more well known as assassins and religious envoys for the Mohgwyn's dynasty's religion, while the Pureblood Knights likely served as more direct enforcers to Mohg's dynasty's military interests. As a matter of fact, throughout the base game, we, the Tarnished, can indeed become a member of the Purebloods through an anointment by White Mask Var. To be fair, I originally believed this to be just a bullshit title created by the delusions of a fanatical group of maniacs. I mean, Var does not give the very best first impressions, so you will forgive me for believing that this seal to be nothing but a scam. That belief of mine did a complete 180 though after traveling through the lands of Shadow and get to know their most prominent knight, one that we will discuss very soon in this segment. For there is only one confirmed individual Pureblood that is known by name, and that individual happens to be their leader. You could also consider Vare to be a member of the Order, which I particularly don't, but my opinion kinda doesn't matter in this regard. The dude is a snake, but well. Since he is the one who elevates you to knightlyhood, and in order to be anointed, another knight or lord needs to do the anointment for you to rise as a knight. So you can freely speculate that Vare is a Pureblood Knight. But keeping with certainty, we now address one of their most skilled warriors in the lands between. A man of unwavering loyalty, conviction, and dignity, Sir Ansbach, the feared commander of the Pureblood Knights. As stated before, Ansbach is the commander and leader of the Pureblood Knights in service of the Lord of Blood. He became famous or infamous after challenging and even wounding the Empyrean Mikola. Although old and already past his prime, he is still the deadliest combatant of Lada's party. And as stated by Lada herself,
I'm afraid Sir Ansbach will have to be next. He insists that he's nothing but a worn-down over-the-hill soldier. But in his day, he was the feared commander of the Pureblood Knights, who cleaved open Mikola the Kine with his blood blade. He claims he hasn't the spirit to take up his sword again, but I doubt it'll be very long before he recalls, as I have, the cascading sheets of blood. I'm afraid he cannot be left to fester.
Wielding a scythe and a bow, Ansbach fights with inhuman dexterity. His elegance with a blade is only matched by the accuracy of his bow. He fights befitting of a pureblood and a sanguine noble. Elegant, precise, and bloody.
Don't you dare approach Mikola the Kind. Needle Knight's Leader, Dryleaf Dane, and our allies will never allow this.
With all that said, if there's another group of warriors that became synonymous with spilling blood in the lands between, that would be the Needle Knights. With that said, most of their currently held quote-unquote fame is the result of their last remaining member, Leda. Similar to their liege lord, the Needle Knights are veiled in obscurity and speculation. How they operated, how they organized their ranks, how they even fought is gauged by our observings of a single individual who may or may not be indicative of their methods, which is very fitting for a fighting force serving Mikola the Kind. Leda is the last surviving member of the Needle Knights, and through her we witness a skilled warrior fully devoted to her oaths. But through her we also see a distrustful, paranoid, and violent assassin, completely fanatical in her regards to killing anyone she deems untrustworthy to serve her liege. Some theories have even gone as far as to suggest that she is the reason for the Order's downfall, having killed her compatriots herself. This could explain the description found within her sword. Though polished to a mirror sheen, this blade still reeks with the stench of crusted blood that lingers from the cull of her knightly comrades. Nevertheless, as far as Leda is concerned, her skills with the blade are nothing to scoff at. Although she may tend to bite off more than she can chew, we can't say the same to the other members of the Needle Knights, or that they would even suffer the same flaws as she does, that of being paranoid or actually taking on opponents that she very likely couldn't defeat on her own. Still, if we take Leda's skills as the standard for the Needle Knights, then we have a really powerful elite force of warriors, befitting their servitude towards the most fearsome of the Empyreans. The Needle Knights were warriors, spies, informants, assassins, and even recruiters for Mikola's cause, which is to be expected from a knightly order serving under the most ambitious schemer of the demigods. In the wars of expansion that saw the rise of gold, in the crusade of order led by the legendary Godfrey himself, an order of warriors became legend throughout the lands, their individual skill and power far surpassing the average soldier, their mastery of the crucible and the very essence of life, weaponized to their will, became both revered and feared throughout the ages. We now talk about the legendary Crucible Knights. The Crucible Knights are likely the most famous knightly order within the lands between, for these men and women are more than just soldiers. They are champions, generals, and bodyguards to the mightiest and most renowned of individuals in the history of the lands between. During the peak of their might, the Crucible Knights served directly under Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. During his tenure, the Crucible Knights were the mightiest enforcers, champions, and generals for America's conquest. They saw victory after victory through the early Wars of Gold, likely taking part in the first conflict of Stormvale, the slaughtering of the giants, and even during the war against the ancient dragons. The Crucible Knights were in all likelihood both Godfrey's and America's most powerful organized military force. Astonished, we never witnessed more than 2 of them fighting together at once. Still, as individuals, the Crucible Knights are the singularly most powerful soldiers the lands between can provide. As such, not many of them have existed even at the height of their power during America's war for conquest. Though we can never truly know the exact numbers of soldiers their order could field during their peak, we can still account for 17 individual knights that the Tarnished can find during their travels. The Crucible Knights were known for their mastery of the many aspects of the crucible of life. That mastery allowed them to become powerhouses of martial prowess in the lands between, and through the crucible itself we can perhaps even speculate on the reasons behind the small number of soldiers their order could field in battle. The crucible itself is the name given by the denizens of the lands between that refers to evolution itself, its chaotic yet powerful force. But evolution is cruel, selective, and unforgiving. Perhaps the selecting process for the Crucible Knights reflected their very belief in the Crucible, a relentless and unforgiving survival of the fittest. Independently of the methods the Crucible Knights employed for the creation of their soldiers, the result is a champion of legend. A warrior more skilled than the sanguine noble, a soldier with greater endurance and ferocity than the Redmanes, and a knight more magically gifted than the Erdtree Knights of Leyndell. Their fighting doctrine seems to be reflective of their martial styles developed by the 2 most prominent members of their order, Ordovis and Seludia. Ordovis and his men utilizes the usage of the Crucible Greatsword and Crucible Horn Shield, complementing their aggression with the added protection of the Great Shield. This is a style of pressure fighting that utilizes simple sword techniques alongside enormous aggression in order to prevent the opponent's ability to retaliate. The added protection of the Great Shield also gave little to no opening for their adversaries to counterattack. In the case of Seludia and her men, on the other hand, she and her soldiers employed the fighting style reliant on the usage of the Crucible Greatspear. Though not lacking the aggression of the Ordovis style, this method of fighting prefers the usage of long-range engagements. The lack of shields and the conjuring of the Crucible Vortex by the spear itself reflected these warriors' preference for the long-range assaults. As a cherry on top, all of these fighting styles can count on the variety of incantations that the Crucible itself gifted these knights. Wings, horns, tails, and even fire breathing can be implemented as effective fighting tools by these soldiers. One of their members is even known of being capable of conjuring a centaur-like body during combat. The very essence of life is at their disposal. Yet time, like the crucible they believe in, seems to have been cruel to these knights. It is no secret that America abhorred those who were blessed by the Crucible and its aspects, so the existence of the Crucible Knight in the Golden Order was a miracle to say the least. Their usefulness as warriors for America's campaigns and their loyalty to Godfrey seems to have allowed them to evade the general prejudice and persecution suffered by those with a stronger connection to the Crucible. Yet, like mentioned before, time was cruel to them, if not ironic. After the banishment of Godfrey, the Crucible Knights found themselves in a predicament, for their appearance and even their strength was starting to be viewed as chaotic and deserving of scorn. The Crucible Knights may no longer be the great order that they once were, but even now they still find service as commanders and bodyguards for the noble families of the lands between. Likely, the ability to field a Crucible Knight could even be seen as a symbol of status and prestige among the nobles of the lands between. Although they are not much more than glorified sentries today, their skill and ferocity have never dulled. There are 3 individuals that are known by name within the order of the Crucible Knights. So important are these individuals that they have defined the very martial doctrines these knights follow to this day. These individuals are Ordovis, Seludia, and Devonia. The first is Ordovez, one of the two honored as foremost of the Crucible Knights. Ordovez is the wearer of the Axe Crucible armor and the wielder of the Ordovez Great Sword. Also, he's the creator of one of their main martial styles for the Crucible Knights. He's currently standing guard over the last floor of the Aurisia hero's grave. Second is Seludia, the second of the two honored as the foremost among the Crucible Knights. Seludia is the wearer of the Crucible Tree armor, the wielder of the Seludia Tree's spear, and the creator of the second main martial style of the Crucible Knights. The Crucible Tree was known for being Seludia's own mark, indicating her close relation to the Crucible of Life. It is stated that the primordial form of the Earth Tree is close in nature to life itself. So perhaps it can be speculated that Seludia herself was the Crucible Knight with the closest affinity to the Crucible of all her brethren in arms. She currently stands guard in front of a dead minor Earth Tree in the deep root depths. Third and final member of the Crucible Knights is Devonia, the most unique individual of their order and their longest serving soldier. Unlike her most prominent brother and sister at arms, Devonia developed her fighting style for her and her alone. She uses a great hammer in combat, and her crucible aspect manifests a centaur-like body to pummel her opponents with ruthless force. She currently finds herself on a solitary quest in order to uncover the origin of the crucible. Now, between all of these powerhouses that could be employed by their respective demigods, who among them is the very best? Which of them can come out on top as the best fighting force? The question is simple, but the answer is a little tricky. If we consider an all-out war, then I feel I must get one particular player/scenario out of the way. Marika and her wars. Marika's unified forces under Godfrey's command is, lore-wise, simply unstoppable. The army she assembled for her conquest possessed the might of the Crucible Knights, the Earth Tree Sentinels, and even the freaking Zamor fought for her at one point. This is the army that conquered the lands between, slaughtered the giants, defeated the dragons, and a portion of this army led by Mesmer was enough to crush the forces of Inir-Lind, who at the time were the great powerhouse of their age. The reason I chose to remove Marika's unified army for this video entirely is so that contests like the Crucible Knights, who likely served as commanding officers for the Golden Army, won't have an unfair advantage in this video. Still, if I were to be completely accurate lore-wise, the Crucible Knights commanding the Golden Army could and would win any scenario of war presented in the lands between. So, with that out of the way, let's see which of these elite fighting forces can truly take the mantle of the best. Let us start by removing the big elephant in the room though, the Crucible Knights. Right out of the gate, these Goliaths are favorites for this sort of contests. Hell, the Crucible Knights are to the soldiers of the lands between what the Space Marines are to the Imperial Guard in Warhammer 40k. One can only imagine the boost of morale having one of these champions in your army could give to your average soldier. In fact, in terms of individual prowess, there is simply no better warrior in the lands between. As individuals, the Crucible Knights can and will defeat all but the absolute very best of champions. If you consider every single individual soldier I listed in the video, you can probably count with one hand the number of individuals here who could realistically fight and defeat a Crucible Knight. So yes, when it comes to the quality of individual soldiers, the Crucible Knights are the very best. With that said, I do believe that if there is an armed force in the lands between who could best them in open combat, that would be the Cleanrot Knights. More numerous and more unified as a fighting unit, the Cleanrots are more suited for the traditional styles of warfare, and most importantly, they can weaponize the most harmful ailment in the lands between, the Scarlet Rot. I sincerely believe that given enough time, Malenia's Knights could take any stronghold in the lands between. Biological warfare is no joke, and these Knights can weaponize it for their advantage. An advantage that no one else has, minus perhaps the Perfumers. This makes them the most dangerous force to fight against. In my opinion, only the Redmanes and the forces of Leyndell have both the resources, the stomach, and enough morale to confront the Cleanrot Knights. And the Redmanes did not fare all that well during their famed battle at Caelid. That battle even forced the Redmanes to implement the usage of fire in order to combat the Rot. It is important to note that styles make fights. For example, the Fire Knights under the command of Mesmer and under the support of their main bulk of their forces could, in theory, have repelled and even beaten Malenia's forces. Mesmer's fighting forces are composed of some of the best pyromancers around, and their war furnaces would have been paramount in facing the Cleanrots. Mesmer might be the only demigod with a sizable and strong enough force to actually face Malenia's armies head-on and come out on top. But again, I must emphasize that this is very likely a case of stylistic mismatch between these two forces. I still do believe that in regards to open warfare, the Cleanrot Knights are the better fighting force the Lands Between can provide. Given enough time, the Scarlet Rot would allow them to win any engagement and succeed in any siege. The moment a single Cleanrot Knight enters your walls, the game is over. You lost. They are simply too dangerous. The rot itself that they carry is too dangerous. With that said, war is very nuanced, and the Cleanrot Knights, for as dangerous as they may be, are not invincible. A particularly witty and resourceful commander could eventually find a way to defeat them. Morgoth being a favorite in this regard. Although Radahn threw the short end of the stick when facing the Cleanrots, his armies are still the dominant force in Caelid, and like mentioned early on in this segment, the full might of the Crucible Knights, led by Godfrey at the head of the Golden Host, would have likely beaten them. Actually, I would say that it would be almost of a certainty that they would be defeated by the Golden Host. Still, I do believe that in the current context of the Lands Between and within the context of the Shattering, Malenia possesses the best elite soldiers to spearhead her military aspirations. But what do you think of my assessment of the demigods' finest? Do you think there's something that I missed as an aspect of their fighting style that I'm overlooked? Leave it down in the comments which of these you believe to be the best elite fighting force of Elden Ring. This has been the Discount Russian, and I'm out. Peace.